Have you ever stood in the middle of a house and suddenly felt invisible? Not because someone yelled at you, not because anyone told you to leave, but because everything around you, the silence, the glances, the closed doors, quietly tells you, you don't belong here anymore. You raised a family with both hands and half a heart, built a home where laughter echoed in the walls, where late dinners and childhood fevers were part of your everyday strength. You gave up sleep, dreams, even pieces of yourself just to keep everyone else standing. But now, you walk on eggshells. You measure your footsteps like they're too loud. You wait until the house is asleep to boil water. You hold your breath just to exist. And this isn't a stranger's house. It's my daughter's, my little girl. The same child I once carried when the world was too heavy for her. The one who used to cling to my blouse and call me her safe place. Today, that same girl has given me a room, but not a home. I sit in the quiet corners, wondering when I became a guest in my own blood's life. I wait for her to leave the kitchen so I can pour a cup of tea without feeling in the way. You ever felt that? Like your very presence in the space you were invited into is somehow too much. That existing has turned into a quiet performance of not disturbing anyone. You don't ask for much, just to be seen, to be heard, to have one place where you can breathe without permission. People mean well. They say things like, you're lucky to have family, or at least you're not alone. But they don't see the cost of that so-called blessing. They don't see what it feels like to sit in silence, afraid to laugh too loud, unsure if you're welcome or just being tolerated. They don't feel the sting of having to ask where the sugar is kept in a house where your daughter lives, a daughter you once raised from scratch. This is the part no one talks about. When elderly parents move in with their children, it's often out of love or necessity. But somewhere along the way, love becomes routine. Care turns into silent rules, and you find yourself fading from the rhythm of the home, not on purpose, but quietly, subtly, until you realize you gave up a life and got four walls in return, a door that's never quite yours, a role you never agreed to, being invisible. I'm not saying there's no love. I know she cares, but caring without connection, it turns into something else, and help without dignity. That feels like exile. If you've ever felt the ache of being quietly erased, if you've ever held in tears because you didn't want to make things harder, then maybe this story is yours too. And if it is, I want you to hear this. You're not being dramatic. You're not being ungrateful. You're just human. And being human means needing space, voice, dignity, even when you're older. Especially when you're older. If this resonates with you, or reminds you of someone you love, stay with me. Because what I'm about to share next isn't just another story. It's a truth that lives in too many homes, behind too many quiet doors. A truth people don't speak aloud, but one that deserves to be heard. Sometimes, I wonder if I'm the only one who feels this way. If maybe I'm just being too sensitive, too dramatic, too old. But then, I remember how many of us carry these silent stories behind polite smiles, quiet nods, and that tight feeling in the chest that comes from holding back what we truly want to say. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt it too. So if anything in this story touched a part of you, a memory, a feeling, or even a hidden truth you haven't dared to speak aloud, I'd really love to know. Drop it in the comments. Just a word, a thought, a piece of your own journey. This space we're building here is for that. For voices that don't usually get the microphone. For hearts that have been told to stay quiet. And if this conversation means something to you, even just a little, go ahead and like this video. That simple click doesn't just show support, it helps this story reach someone else who might be sitting in the same silence, someone who's been needing to hear, you're not alone in this. And if you want to keep walking through these honest reflections with me, stories that don't get told enough, but matter more than we realize, then subscribe to the channel. That way, every time we open another door like this one, you'll be right here with us. And that matters, because your presence, it truly makes a difference. Now, I want to go even deeper into this. It was supposed to be temporary. That's what everyone said. Just until you get better, they told me. Just while things settle. And I believed it, not just because I trusted them, but because I needed to believe that this wasn't a goodbye to the life I knew. My daughter welcomed me into her home with arms that felt familiar, warm, reassuring. I remember her holding my hand and saying, "You'll always have a place here." At the time, I didn't know that place would feel more like a borrowed corner than a shared life. In the beginning, everything looked like love. She set up a small room for me, brought me tea in the evenings, even asked if I wanted to help cook. Just like old times. I was touched. I told myself I was lucky. But little by little, things shifted. Quietly, subtly. Not in anger, not with cruelty, but with distance. A certain tone in her voice when I left the light on. A sigh when I sat too long in the living room. The way her eyes flicked toward the clock when I started a story at the dinner table. I started to sense the boundaries before they were spoken. I noticed that my slippers stayed tucked under the bed, that my voice softened when I asked questions. I tiptoed more, took up less space. I stopped singing while I did the dishes, something I used to do with joy, not because she asked me to stop, but because I felt I should. The unspoken rules of her home wrapped around me, like invisible strings. Not chains, no, that would be easier to name. This was different, softer, but still strong enough to make me feel like I didn't quite belong. It's strange how silence grows, how it fills the corners of a house faster than sound. And before I knew it, the days began to feel longer, the rooms colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. I still smiled, still said thank you. I was grateful, I truly was. But I couldn't ignore that familiar ache settling in my chest, the feeling of being somewhere where you're gently reminded you don't fully fit, that this is not your home, it's your daughter's, and you're a guest, even if no one says the word out loud. What hurt most wasn't the space or the schedule or the new routine. It was realizing that I had become someone she had to adjust to, not someone she still invited in with joy. That the bond we once had, the one built on bedtime stories and shared tears, now felt formal, polite, and sometimes strained. I didn't want to be a burden. I still don't. But I also don't want to vanish inside someone else's life, just because mine is quieter now. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because understanding what happens in these quiet rooms, behind the polite smiles, reveals a truth most families never speak aloud. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we start. Comment there. That makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because what people often don't see is that silence can be loud, painfully loud. There's a particular kind of ache that comes from holding back your own presence, from constantly calculating your every step, your every word, so you don't disturb the air around you. I've lived in that space. I'm living it now. And it changes you. I wait until the whole house is asleep before I go to the kitchen. I don't want to be seen boiling water, as if even the sound of a kettle might be too much. I whisper to myself instead of speaking out loud. I fold my blanket the moment I get up, not because anyone asked me to, but because I feel like I have to erase every sign that I was there. That's what it means to live in fear of being a burden. You begin to disappear while you're still alive. It's not that anyone is cruel to me. That's the most confusing part. There are no harsh words, no doors slammed in my face. But the distance is there in the way they smile with tired eyes, in how conversations get shorter when I walk into the room, in how decisions are made around me, not with me. You don't need to be yelled at to feel unwanted. Sometimes it's the quiet that cuts deepest. I sit on the edge of the couch like I'm borrowing the cushion. I ask if I can use the bathroom, even though I live here. I think twice before offering help, worried I might do something the wrong way. And I always say thank you. Not just out of habit, but because I feel like I have to prove my gratitude every single day, just for being allowed to stay. Do you know what it does to someone to live like that? It makes you smaller, not in size, but in spirit. You begin to second guess your worth. You start wondering if maybe you are too much, too old, too slow, too forgetful. And slowly, the memories of who you were start to fade behind the reality of who you're allowed to be now. I wasn't always like this. I used to be strong, decisive. I ran a home. I raised children. I faced storms and still stood tall. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being seen as that person. Now I'm mom, grandma, the old lady in the back room. I'm still me. I still have thoughts, stories, opinions. I still crave warmth, conversation, laughter. But there's no space for that when the air around you demands silence. And the hardest part, I'm scared to say anything. Scared that if I speak, I'll be seen as ungrateful. That if I express even a sliver of sadness, someone will say, Well, if you're not happy here, we can make other arrangements. And I don't want that. I don't want to be alone. I don't want to lose what little I have left of family. So I smile, I nod, I shrink. And inside, I quietly ask myself, when did my life become something I had to apologize for? This isn't just my story. It's one I've heard in the voices of other mothers, grandmothers, elders who once had kitchens full of laughter and now whisper in hallways like ghosts. There's a whole generation walking on eggshells in their children's homes, not because they're weak, but because they're afraid to be one more thing to deal with. And that fear, it's exhausting. It makes you question whether you still belong anywhere at all, whether there's still a space where you can breathe freely, make tea without guilt, exist without explanation. Comment there. I'm on this journey too. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because something happens in these quiet routines that's hard to explain unless you've lived it. The roles start to shift in a way that doesn't feel gentle or respectful. It feels like being slowly erased. One day, you realize you're not making decisions anymore. You're waiting for permission. Don't stay up too late, Mom. You should eat this, not that. No, we already talked about it. You're not going out alone. It sounds caring, doesn't it? Protective. But here's the truth behind the kindness. They're no longer asking. They're deciding. And somewhere in all of that, I stopped being an adult in their eyes. Today, it's my daughter who tells me when it's time to go to bed. Who checks if I've washed the dishes right. Who moves my things without asking. Then tells me gently that she's just organizing. And I nod, because arguing feels ungrateful. But inside, it hurts. It chips away at something sacred. My right to be this is what some people call emotional infantilization. Others describe it as control disguised as care. Whatever the name, the feeling is the same. It's like you've become someone's responsibility instead of someone they respect. And while I understand that aging comes with changes, I haven't lost my mind. I haven't forgotten how to make choices. But I've lost the space to prove that I still can. When you're treated like a fragile object, not out of love, but out of fear, you stop feeling seen. It's not about rebellion. It's not about refusing help. It's about the dignity of still being part of your own story. Because when every choice is made for you, even the small ones, you start questioning your own voice. You hesitate before speaking. You worry that every opinion will be met with a sigh or a correction. And eventually, you go quiet. Not because you have nothing to say, but because saying it no longer matters. I look at my daughter sometimes and wonder, does she see the woman who raised her? The one who stayed awake through her fevers, who held her hand on the first day of school, who built a life from scratch so she could dream bigger than I ever could? Or does she just see the old woman who now sits too long in the kitchen chair? The mental shift is subtle, but powerful. One day, you're the anchor of a family. The next, you're the shadow in the hallway. Not because your heart has changed, but because the world around you has decided you're no longer capable. And when care becomes control, love becomes a kind of quiet prison. I know some of you understand this. Maybe you've lived it. Maybe you've watched your parents go through it. Maybe you're caught in the middle, unsure of how to help without taking over. Wherever you are in this story, I hope it makes you stop and think. Because this isn't about blame, it's about awareness, about restoring dignity, about seeing the invisible weight we place on those we claim to protect. Right there, this makes sense to me. Now I want to go even deeper into this, because there's a kind of grief that doesn't come from death. It comes from disappearing slowly while still alive. That's what it feels like to lose your identity in someone else's house. Not because they meant to take it from you, but because little by little, it no longer fits in the space they've made for you. Back in my home, my real home, I had a rhythm. I had mornings where I opened the windows and let the sun hit the floor just the way I liked. I had my chair, my mug, my silence, my scent in the air. There was a place for me, not just my body, but my habits, my way of doing things. And here the first, sit on the edge of a borrowed bed in a borrowed room, folding myself into corners so no one trips over me. I miss making coffee the way I like it. I miss leaving my book open on the table without someone cleaning it up. I miss playing my favorite songs out loud without worrying if it's too old, too slow, too out of place in this modern space that doesn't feel like it belongs to me. But most of all, I miss feeling like myself, like I matter. You know, sometimes I even miss my solitude, the kind of loneliness that still felt like freedom. At least back then, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for existing. At least then, the silence was mine. Here, I walk around on eggshells, careful not to disturb the house I'm supposedly welcome in. But am I? Or am I just a guest who overstayed her welcome? When you lose the ability to choose, you begin to lose the sense of who you are, what you like, what makes you smile. And when no one asks about those things anymore, what you want for lunch, what movie you'd like to watch, if you're feeling okay really, you start to forget that those questions even mattered. You forget how to answer them, or worse, you stop believing you're allowed to. And that's the hardest part. Because I haven't just lost a home, I've lost pieces of myself I worked a lifetime to build. I look in the mirror and sometimes don't recognize the woman staring back. Not because of age, but because of erasure. Because when no one makes space for who you are, you start making yourself smaller, quieter, until one day, you don't know what you sound like anymore. If you've ever felt this, if you've ever looked around and asked, who am I in this house? Then you know this isn't just about family. It's about identity, about dignity, about finding your reflection in a space that lets you exist fully, not just function silently. Comment below. I know this feeling. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because there comes a moment when the silence itself becomes too heavy to carry, not because we don't have the words, but because somewhere along the way, we stopped believing anyone would really listen. But I want to say something clearly today. I still know what I feel. I still know who I am, even if they've forgotten. They think because I stay quiet, I've surrendered. They think because I don't speak up, I've stopped having opinions. But the truth is, I've simply learned that my voice doesn't always find a place to land. That my thoughts, my desires, my emotions, they've been reduced to background noise in a house that once promised love and care. But love without respect becomes a cage, and care without listening is not care at all. I don't want to be commanded. I want to be considered. I don't need to be treated like a child. I need to be recognized as a woman who has lived, who has raised a family, who has cried, fought, built, dreamed. Someone who still has a heartbeat full of meaning. Someone who still wants to wake up with purpose. You know, there's something deeply painful about having to explain that you still love, still think, still feel, as if that should ever be questioned. As if growing older somehow stripped me of all complexity. But aging doesn't erase you. It reveals you. It brings to the surface everything you've carried in silence, everything you've swallowed to avoid conflict, everything you've buried because there's no space for that here. Sometimes I sit in my room, looking at the ceiling, and I whisper to myself, I'm still here, I still matter. And maybe that sounds silly to someone who's never felt invisible, but to me, it's a small act of survival. A reminder that I haven't disappeared entirely, not yet. I want to make something clear. I don't resent my daughter. I don't blame her. I know she's overwhelmed, juggling 1,000 things, but love that doesn't ask how the other person feels, that doesn't create space for truth, ends up becoming something else entirely. Something hollow, something that leaves you lonelier than being alone ever did. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt what I'm describing, that quiet ache of wanting to be heard, not pitied, to be seen, not handled, then I'm speaking for both of us. This story isn't just mine, it's the unspoken reality of so many mothers, grandmothers, elders, whose voices have been softened, muted, dismissed, but we're still here. And we still know what we feel. Write in the comments, I still have a voice. Now I want to go even deeper into this. Because after all the silence, the hesitation, the shrinking of who we once were, maybe what we need most isn't another rule or routine, but a real conversation. A space where we're not trying to prove our worth or tiptoe around discomfort, but where we're allowed to be, to speak, to feel, without fear of being dismissed, misunderstood, or seen as dramatic. Imagine if generations truly sat together, not in obligation, but in honesty. If daughters could hear the soft cracks in their mother's voice and not rush to fix, but pause to feel. If parents could say, I'm hurting, and instead of being told, you're just tired, they were met with, tell me more. There's a kind of healing that only begins when both sides stop assuming and start asking. When we stop managing each other's feelings and start honoring them. Because underneath it all, we're still human, still longing for connection, still needing to feel that our presence matters. And that doesn't disappear with age. If anything, the older we get, the the deeper the desire becomes, not to be taken care of, but to be taken seriously, to be part of the decisions, the rhythms, the moments, not as guests, but as family. We all carry invisible histories, wounds we've learned to hide, regrets we've never named, and sometimes the people closest to us don't see them, not because they don't care, but because we never created the safety to reveal them. Maybe that's what's missing. Not love, but safety. The kind that says, you can show me who you are now, not just who you were. There's no perfect formula, no guaranteed outcome. But one small, brave step can change everything. A gentle truth spoken without accusation. A question asked not to control, but to understand. A hand reached out, not just to offer help, but to invite someone back into belonging. That's how transformation begins. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet shifts. The kind that start with a sentence like, can we talk, really talk? Because when we speak from the heart, without masks or roles or defenses, something sacred happens. We stop being enemies in the same house, and start becoming people again, people with flaws, stories, hopes. And maybe it's in those honest moments that we start to remember each other, not just as child and parent, but as souls still learning how to love each other through time. So I ask, what if we started listening, not to respond, but to connect? What if we dared to speak, not to win, but to heal? And what if we realized that sometimes the deepest wounds aren't caused by cruelty, but by absence, by the conversations we never had because we didn't think we needed to, or because we thought we had time? Comment here. Real conversations matter. Now, I want to go even deeper into this, because maybe the loudest silence between adult children and their aging parents isn't the one that falls over dinner tables. It's the one that grows quietly inside us. When love turns into formality and listening becomes a rushed habit, what hurts the most isn't always what's said. Sometimes, it's the things left unsaid, the questions no one dares to ask, the emotions we all feel but pretend not to notice. When a mother, a father, someone who spent a lifetime building a home, starts to feel like a guest in their own story, that speaks volumes about how we've been taught to view aging, not as a time of wisdom, contribution, or connection, but as a slow fading out, as if growing older comes with an unspoken expectation to shrink, to stay quiet, to step aside. And this isn't just one person's story, it's a mirror, one that reflects what's happening in so many families, where love is present but true conversation is missing, where gestures of care often hide a fear of having difficult talks, where I'll handle it for you replaces what would you like to do, and slowly, without anyone meaning to, control replaces connection. Decisions are made with good intentions, but without shared voices, and what's left is a growing distance behind closed doors. But maybe, just maybe, there's still time to shift that dynamic, to build a different kind of closeness. One where care doesn't mean control, where love makes space for dialogue, not silence, where aging parents are seen not as people who need to be managed, but as human beings with memory, wisdom, feelings, and yes, still full of life. Because dignity doesn't retire with age, and neither should your right to be heard. If this story touched you in any way, drop a comment below that simply says, I just wanted to be heard. Your voice matters, and it reminds us all that we're not alone in this, that others out there feel the same. And if you want to keep hearing stories like this, real ones, that speak straight to the heart, then this channel might just be the place where your voice belongs to. And if you're still here with me, thank you. Truly, it means this story touched something inside you, maybe something you've lived, or something you've seen in the eyes of someone you love. This space we've built together, where emotions are safe to exist and truths are allowed to breathe, is what gives meaning to every second of these conversations. So, if this message resonated with you, if you felt seen or understood in any part of it, go ahead and type in the comments, this message was for me. I read each one, and they remind me that we're not speaking into silence, we're connecting heart to heart. And if you'd like to keep walking through these stories with me, stories that don't just talk but feel, then I invite you to subscribe. Not for the numbers, but because the more we grow here, the more voices we give space to. If you felt that quiet connection, if something in this made you pause, smile, cry, or just reflect, hit the like button. It tells me that what we're creating here matters. And now, there's another story waiting for you, one that ties into this in a way you might not expect. It's right here beside this video. Click on it and come with me, because the next part of the conversation is just beginning.